Archer, for those of you who don't know. I'm the chair of the History and Theory of Contemporary Art program here. And I am so incredibly excited to have all of you here and to welcome Jeremy back to campus to celebrate the graduating class.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for coming. This is like kind of cool. I never expected when I went here that there'd be some reason for me to be standing on the other side of this podium. So it's awesome. It's a good opportunity. And I think I was trying to figure out what to talk to you about. And I think I remember when I was sitting on the other side of this podium and about to graduate here. And I think the most valuable thing I could talk about today is kind of like how I got started. So the direction, I guess, the bulk of what I'm going to talk about today is kind of what I did after I graduated from here. A little bit of background before I moved here. I was born in upstate New York. I was born in Albany, and I grew up in a smaller city called Saratoga Springs. Anybody been to Saratoga Springs? Yeah! It's the oldest continuous running racetrack in America. So it also has the oldest skate park in New York State. I grew up skateboarding, and the skate park was like 5 blocks from my mom's house. And I worked there all through junior high and high school, and I also worked at a skate shop in my hometown. And so obviously my first relationships with art of any kind were skateboard graphics. We get really shitty winters in upstate New York, and I used to sit in the skate shop and just look at all the board graphics on the wall and try and redraw them. And that's kind of like the foundations for the way I learned to draw. Between that and watching a shitload of cartoons when I was a little kid, I think the actual way that I draw came from just like really admiring all the skateboard illustrators and designers from the late 80s and early 90s. And at that time, some of the guys that were producing the graphics were really phenomenal illustrators, and they had a huge impact on me. And like, without even realizing it, you know, I wasn't drawing because I was planning to go to art school at that point. I was just drawing their graphics because I thought they were awesome. And to me, at that age, skateboarding was the greatest thing in the world, and it was really the only culture that I was like heavily invested in, skateboarding and hip hop. And so as a result, these guys that were sort of shaping the face of the sport at the time became my art history. I mean, that was truly what I, related to as far as art went. I graduated from high school and went to a junior college in Albany and got my associate's degree and got, applied to other schools, and it was time to move somewhere and finish my bachelor's degree. And I got accepted to the School of Visual Arts in New York and the Boston Museum School and the San Francisco Art Institute. And now rewind, I mean, this is like 1994. In the mid-90s, San Francisco was the skateboard capital of the world. It was where most of the videos and the magazines were all based here, and some of my favorite professionals lived here, and it was it was way more important to me at that time than art school. And if I was going to take out all these loans and move across country to like pursue my education, I just figured, fuck, I might as well go to where I want to go and go skateboarding. Like, it was a legitimate reason for me to move here and skateboard, which was, like I said, at that time, it was the biggest thing in my life. And artistically, I was influenced by things that were going on out here. Barry McGee was a big hero of mine at that time, and he had just done the cover of Slap magazine, and the Art Institute was clever enough to use him in the catalog that year. So like when I was shopping for schools, the rep from the Art Institute that came to my junior college hands me this catalog. It's full of Barry McGee, and I was like, sold. That's part of the reason I came here, to be honest, was like his relationship with this school and the fact that they used him as kind of a beacon to get guys like me to come here. During the time that I went to school here, like I said, I was on borrowed money and had student loans, and I worked as a janitor here in the morning before school. I mopped and swept the drawing studios, and I worked at Copeland Sports on Market Street selling snowboards to idiots. And I had a bunch of crummy jobs, and I had a full-time girlfriend, and like I said, I was skateboarding mostly, and unfortunately probably more than I was focusing on my education at that point. And so I didn't really interact with SFAI probably as much as I should. If I had a regret about going here, is that I really didn't. Aside from the fact that, like, I was really into my classes, and I worked really hard, and I got good grades for the first time in my life, and, like, I was learning stuff. I didn't really take advantage of the school's events or the social atmosphere. I didn't really fit in. And to be honest, at that time, skateboarding was so important to me that if I had free time after I was done with classes, I certainly wasn't going to hang out here and drink wine. I went skateboarding with my friends. And, it's funny because they say that, when you're studying and getting your degree, a lot of the connections you make in college are the connections that help you open doors to like start your career. And I guess I knew that when I was going here, and had some guilt that I wasn't taking advantage of the school more and interacting more with my professors and my fellow students and coming to the openings. But at the same time, what I was doing was developing like strong friendships and a relationship with the skateboard community outside of SFAI. And that's a really, like a point I'd really like to make to anybody who's studying here now, I think. And it wasn't conscious. I mean, it just kind of happened accidentally because I was friends with all these skateboard dudes. But part of the, like, probably one of the most valuable things you get about attending this school is where it is. I mean, SFAI is a great school with a great history and, you know, amazing people that have taught here over the years and people that have attended here. But quite possibly, in my opinion, the most important thing you get out of attending here is the fact that it's located in this city. And, you know, like the San Francisco greater education that you get by being in this school. And I know that, you know, from my experience, I had a lot of friends that went to school here at that time, and their San Francisco existed was pretty much on this block, you know? Like, they were really involved in all the activities at school, and they were super, you know, participating in everything socially here and really networking all their art school buddies. And at the same time, like I said, I kind of lost out on that because developing these relationships with another community, like a subculture in this city that in turn opened a lot of doors for me, and I'll explain that in a minute. But it's just a reminder that, you know, when you're studying here, definitely take advantage of everything the school has to offer, but most importantly, what the school has to offer is where it's located. And this is a city that has, you know, some of the most phenomenal creative history on the West Coast, not just to mention artists that have been here in the past, but also a lot of the artists that are working here today. And you're doing yourself almost a disservice by not investing yourself as heavily as you can afford to with your time while you're here in the art community that's around you. Because I think sometimes, not just connections, but the lessons you can learn from working artists in your own city is invaluable. So in 1998, I graduated from here, and Thrasher magazine, which is like one of the biggest skateboard magazines in the world, they have this like 2-page spread that they do for artists where they show pictures of you skating and they put your artwork in there. And this was kind of like the first time I'd ever had anything in print. This section called Canvas, where I got to go out with like this staff photographer from Thrasher and shoot pictures and get my art in the magazine. And this was it, you know, I was satisfied with my San Francisco experience. I was done with college, I'd skated my ass off and didn't wind up in the hospital very often, and was satisfied with my education and the whole time I lived out here. And after I graduated, my girlfriend and I were just planning on moving back to New York and figuring out the next step to start paying these loans off. And it was during this time, like literally about a month after I graduated, one of my neighbors, a kid that I skated with all the time, calls me up and he's like, man, now let me back up a second. During my stay here, I was originally a painting major, but I tended to shift my focus in my senior year more towards screen printing. The looming debt that I had acquired by going here was starting to scare the shit out of me, and I knew I had always had jobs in screen printing. There was a guy in my hometown who had the contract printing job for Ben & Jerry's, and he used to print all the t-shirts for them, so I learned about screen printing in high school. And when I moved here, while I was attending SFAI, I got a job at a wallpaper company, which is no longer in the Mission anymore. It was called Winfield. It used to be on 23rd and Harrison. And through my screen printing class, I basically got this job where I was in charge of overseeing like the reproduction of really high-end like fabric back wallpaper, and I had to learn to mix by the gallon with nothing other than a spatula and raw color and try and reproduce like rooms full of wallpaper. So I had all this like kind of professional screen printing experience where I knew like, all right, not only does this medium lend itself to my artwork, because a lot of my stuff is really line-driven because I was inspired by skateboard graphics and those get screen printed. It was like something that really lent itself to me artistically, and probably out of everything I was making at SFAI, my screen prints were the strongest stuff. And I also knew that if I got really good at screen printing, I could probably go and find a job to help pay these loans back. So like I said, fast forward to the summer after I graduated, and this neighbor of mine, who was just a kid I knew from skating, was like, listen, I run the manufacturing plant out in Hunters Point for the San Francisco skateboard industry, where we print all the boards and t-shirts and posters for Juxtapose and stickers. And he's like, my boss just quit, and at 25 years old, this kid just took over a business with like 40 employees, and he's like, I need an assistant. And so literally like 6 weeks out of SFAI, I got this job that was not only like, it's a decent salary, it was a paying gig to run a print shop that also involved my passion and the reason I moved here. So I mean, you can imagine just getting out of art school was like beyond my wildest dreams. Like suddenly I was working around skateboarding, but it was in what I had come out here to study. I mean, not only was I thrilled, but like my parents were proud and didn't think I was retarded because I actually like figured out some way to make a living. I guess now I'll like talk about my artwork and art shows and stuff. Ghosts of the Barbary Coast was a show I did in December of 2008 at the 5024 SF Gallery, Upper Playground. Like I said, I was doing t-shirts for Upper Playground a really long time ago, and I've probably been showing in that gallery now for like 10 years. And I'm really proud of this. Like, they kind of got their start right around the same time I did, and it was, at that time there were no like white walls and shooting galleries, and like it was, you know, other than the luggage store, there weren't a lot of like independent galleries in the city that were showing the type of stuff I was making. So my relationship with this gallery and the fact that that company and that brand have grown at the same time as my career is something, you know, much like my relationship with Fecal Face, where it's like I was friends with the guy that runs that website long before he had a website, and you know, these are, like I said earlier, these are the relationships that make San Francisco special. It was like my connections with the guy both that runs Upper Playground and that gallery, and also John that does Fecal Face. They were able to kind of put my artwork out in front of people and kind of push the whole thing forward, and that's a relationship I'm really grateful for. This particular show was inspired by the fact that I moved back over to North Beach around the same time as I started working on this show. Like I said, when I graduated in '98, I never came over here again. You know, like for 10 years or something. Like I don't know anybody that lives on this side of town. Wasn't other than coming out to dinner in North Beach once in a while. I just didn't really make it back over to the school very often, or anything else on this side of town. And I found this really crazy apartment on Craigslist that I still live in, and it gave me this opportunity to move back over here. And I guess just the full circle nature of the fact that like I moved out here to go to school, and I'd attended this school in this neighborhood, and then 10 years later, almost to the day, I wound up getting this apartment, which is just down the street from here. And so suddenly I'm back in the surroundings that I was in when I first moved here. And it really made me start thinking a lot about, like, what am I doing here? And, like, how am I a taxpayer? And how long am I planning on living here? And, like, how did all this happen? And it also connected me with, you know, like, a lot of the history that this city is based on. You know, like, a lot of the Gold Rush era history happened on my block and within 6 blocks from my house. And I knew a lot of that stuff, you know, but it had never really hit me as being all that relevant, you know. Like, I knew San Francisco, you know, the Gold Rush had founded the city, and all these crazy people moved here from all over the world to either find gold or sell people stuff that found gold or steal gold from people that found gold. And, you know, this is the type of magnetism that this city had from its infancy. It was, you know, this place that attracted crazy people. I mean, think about it. If you just heard word of mouth that, you know, halfway around the world these people were finding gold in the dirt, and you're going to take off and get on a boat for like several months in hopes that by the time you get there, there's still gold in the dirt, you're a crazy person. Right? These are the founding fathers and mothers of our city. You know, like, these are the kinds of people that came here and built this place. And to me, I feel like that inherent craziness is something that never really went away. You know, like, North Beach is now very affluent comparatively, and you know, there's a lot of rich young people with great jobs, but there is also an infinite number of crazy people. And this, I think, is really like a key thing. Like, this city, no matter how whitewashed or how much they're trying to turn it into a West Coast Manhattan, San Francisco's crazy. And a lot of that, I think, is the inherent nature of the city itself and the reason it's here. It attracts crazy people. And I tend to think it always will. And this particular body of work was inspired by living in this very historic neighborhood. I have a neighbor who's kind of an unofficial San Francisco historian, who also coincidentally was a roadie for Metallica at one point in his career. And this guy's kind of my San Francisco expert, you know, like, he would feed me books during the time that I was working on this show and teach me about, like, you know, local legends and folklore and stories and stuff. And anytime I was reading between the lines and I wanted to go to him and ask him about it, he was, you know, sort of the authority on this particular body of work, and really helped me learn about my own neighborhood, you know. And it made the work, or the information, really easy to digest, because I would read something about some crazy bar that, you know, had a grizzly bear drunk chained up to the wall, and I'd realize, holy shit, that's 2 blocks from here. You know, like, I walk by there all the day. My friend runs an art store across the street from there. And these are the things that made this particular body of work really personal. And I'm just going to go through some of the paintings from this show and some pictures of it and just talk a little bit about it. This has to do with the city's resiliency. We gained a reputation around the world after the 1906 earthquake and fire as being this very resilient city, and Phoenix became our symbol because we burned to the ground and built it right back up. And this was something that the world recognized us as like a really strong force, and this also, I think, has a lot to do with the climate of people that moved here. You know, you weren't scared of a little hard work, and you know, there was obviously money here at the time because of the gold, and this painting is just particularly about the city's resiliency and the history, and a lot of that also comes from spending time in Nob Hill, because I learned that part of the reason a lot of the hills in Nob Hill are so abrupt, and they'll be like flat and all of a sudden just drops off like a cliff, is because they didn't necessarily have the excavation equipment up here back then to like do away with a lot of the, you know, decimated buildings, and a lot of these billion-dollar homes up here are built on top of just crushed rubble from the original fire. And to me, the irony of owning one of these massive properties up here and knowing that you just kind of have like you know, rotting wood shack underneath it is. This painting was about Joaquin Murrieta, who was like a famous thief at the time, and liked to find dudes that had found gold and steal it from them. And there was this whole rumor that, you know, when they caught him, they cut his head off and put it in a jar. And there's all these theories recently, even within the last 20 years, where different people in the Bay Area claim to actually have this jar with this dude's rotting head inside it. And he was just kind of a hero of well, of a lot of the people during the gold rush that were, you know, sort of not treated justly in the Bay Area, and the Mexican population was definitely chased off a lot of the gold claims, and you know, Joaquin Murrieta was one of them apparently, and it pissed him off to the point where he just started rampaging and stealing from people. And again, much to the sort of rebellious nature of this town and the people that were making it happen at that time, he seemed like an ideal character. This painting's about the last duel in California and the outlawing of dueling, and it was a difference in opinion over where San Francisco stood on the Civil War between two guys, Broderick and Terry, and symbolized the end of a very violent era. And I put on the ends of the gun handles, there's a bull and a bear, because at the same time, you know, it's hard to imagine, but like right near Dolores Park, there's a fighting ring where on a Friday night you could go watch the bull and the bear match. And they would actually take a bull and put it against a bear, and you could pay money to gamble on it. And to me, this whole time period is really, you know, it's a very violent culture in San Francisco at that time. And so this painting is about, you know, the end of the duel in California, which was considered a gentleman's way to settle a dispute, but also the end of a very violent and aggressive era, and they were trying to make us look classier at that point. This painting was about just the numerous ways that people traveled here, and like I was saying earlier, coming here on the risk that there might actually still be some gold around by the time you showed up. People came by stagecoach through the middle of the country and died on their way here, and people came by boat, and the same sort of risks where you're going to travel that far to come here in hopes you might get rich. I mean, you're a nut. This piece, I do a lot of sculptural works with a wood carver that I was introduced to in Indonesia named Nyoman, and a few years before the Barbary Coast, I flew to Indonesia and went to find this guy. A kid had come to one of my shows and given me his business card and said, hey, look, you know, I do a lot of work in Indonesia with this wood carver that I think you should meet. And, you know, I sent him some drawings, and he sent me back some carvings, and I started to think, this is sketchy. This is way too affordable, and this guy's way too cool. Like, there's a room full of little kids somewhere carving this shit. I feel really bad about it. So I went there, and I went to find him. Now, it turns out the guy's in the absolute middle of nowhere, and the closest town was like 45 minutes away by moped. So I lived in this funny bungalow in the middle of nowhere and rode my moped every day 45 minutes through the jungle to go sit on this guy's floor. And he couldn't have been more legit. I mean, he was my age, he had a family, he had 2 beautiful twin daughters that ran around all day, and he had this badass team of guys. Like, he had some teenager apprentice carvers, and then he had some old geezer dudes that were like the finishing work. And he just kind of oversaw the whole thing. And so this is when that relationship really took off. And for the Barbary Coast show, I decided to just go nuts with this guy. And he'd offered me, he'd gotten so psyched on my stuff, because, you know, in Indonesia, wood carving is a huge trade skill, and a lot of his friends do it. But suddenly he had this shit that was just so weird compared to like the religious icons and these other things these dudes were carving. His friends would come over and be like, whoa, a duck. With hatchets, like, way to go, dude. So he started giving me unbelievable deals. Like, he was offering me prices that were like way cheaper than they should have been, and so I just started making crazy shit with him. And these are these kind of life-size animals that poke out of the wall. And this particular one is a really interesting story. It's about a prostitute in Chinatown back in the day called the Golden Peach, who was the possession of one of the Tong gangs in Chinatown, but the object of affection of the leader of their rival gang. And at some point, the rival gang challenged the guys that owned this prostitute to a hatchet battle. Winner takes the prostitute. And so at the stroke of midnight on Waverly Place, sometime in the early to mid-1800s, a bunch of dudes got out there and hacked each other's limbs off. And in the end, the rival gang actually won, because I guess they had more dudes with arms by the time it was over. And, you know, they received the honor of getting this sought-after prostitute, but unfortunately it was a salty win, because a few days later, the leader of that gang, who finally got his true love prostitute, got stabbed in the back of the head while he was getting his hair cut. This particular piece is, I mean, this is kind of not necessarily based on a straight gold rush story. This is more about the state symbol of the grizzly bear, and, you know, how it's a fairly extinct animal and was basically killed off by the people that came here to build this state. And it's the funny irony that is a tradition to this day, where I feel like the indigenous natives of the Bay Area just generally tend to get pushed out over the years as it becomes more and more expensive to live here and more difficult to be here. It's the symbol of the state, and yet the state's made it really hard to actually be a native and stay in California, or San Francisco for that matter. Yeah, so that's the Barbary Coast stuff for the most part. Because of that show, I was contacted by the Laguna Art Museum in Laguna Beach, California. And it's like one of the oldest state-run museums in California. And a young woman named Grace Anderson had just been given the job as the director of the museum. And Grace grew up here and knew who I was. And so her first order of business was to tell the museum that they should give this funny dude from San Francisco a solo show. So in November of 2009, they gave me the whole second floor of their museum. And this is probably like one of my more prestigious opportunities at the time. Unfortunately for me, I had just started to feel some success in the art world. Like, I had gotten a really good gallery in New York finally, and I was starting to show abroad in better galleries, and like opportunities were really improving for me. Unfortunately, as that happened, the economy took a shit. And 2008, 2009 were not exactly strong economic years for the art world, and as a result, the galleries that I had just hooked up with were really struggling. And so it was good timing, because this museum thing supposedly had a budget, and it was a great place for me to put my work. And to think about what I was going to talk about, I really just decided that I'd discuss like all the hardship that was going on around me, friends that were losing their jobs, people who were trying to raise a family but couldn't figure out how to pay for it, lots of my friends as artists that were having to quit being a full-time artist or a musician and follow something else just to be able to get by. And that was actually the basis for this body of work, was generally like, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, if we survive this period of hardships, there's all kinds of amazing shit ahead of us. And I'll just flip through some of these. This one was about surviving rough storms and waiting for things to improve. And it was part of an installation where me and a bunch of my friends painted this whole room. So you can see it. I do a lot of cutouts on wood. I like to cut plywood and paint back into them. I like the rigidity of painting on a wooden surface instead of canvas, because I put my hand down. And I like working with wood. My grandfather was a carpenter, and I spent a lot of my summers as a little kid like making toy guns and airplanes and shit in his workshop. And as a teenager, I built a lot of jump ramps. I worked at a skate park and learned how to make quarter pipes. So my construction skills are basically like tools you'd need to build a jump ramp. And as an art dude, when I started painting, I started off by just taking squares of wood and painting on that. And I thought, I'll cut this thing out and use my, milk crate full of tools to make these into like a kind of sculptural shape. And they were not only fun to do because I like the craft of woodworking, but they got a good response. And so these paintings that are hanging in this installation are, cut plywood with acrylic paint. This is just more angles of the thing at the art museum. Laguna Beach is a weird place. I don't know if anybody's had the misfortune to spend a bunch of time there, but it's a really funny city that was like founded by landscape painters. Like literally the original politicians of the city were painters. Like people moved there from all over the world to do landscape paintings for the quality of light. But unfortunately, if you fast forward to 2009, it's still in Orange County. And man, in a town where I didn't see any threatening criminals of any kind, every cop in the city drives around on a motorcycle with a sawed-off shotgun mounted on the back of their motorcycle. And that just doesn't really explain Orange County. No offense to anybody that's from Orange County, but it's just a scary place for me. This couch I made with my woodcarver friend Neilman and my friend Francisco Robles, who lives here in the city, a guy that I used to skateboard with who makes high-end furniture. And we sent the little carved bits to my woodcarver in Indonesia, and Francisco built the rest of it. And this was part of a viewing area at the museum show where you could sit and watch videos like the pigs video and other time lapses I've done since then. A lot of this work focused on changes that I was noticing and things that were bothering me about not only the economy that we were dealing with, but a lot of the results of industries that were failing partially due to technology and partially due to the economy. Everybody was getting Kindles and these like electronic books, and the Chronicle filed for bankruptcy at this time, and like there was all these things going on where it looked to me like I was no longer going to be able to own anything printed. And considering one of my screener kind of scenario with a lot of my friends, and this piece and the one after it are basically about that. Here's this country rabbit considering relocating to an urban environment to find some better future for himself, and here's an urban pigeon who's sort of looking to the countryside because obviously the city sucks and he's reduced to a Starbucks umbrella. Took a road trip through, I like to drive across country once every 5 years if I can. I like old vans, and they're really cool to get in and drive across country in. And sometimes I bring my dad, and so me and my dad drove across country that year, and just got really sad about the state of affairs for Native Americans in this country, and kind of related it back to the decimation of the buffalo, and that's where this one comes from. Same thing with bikers, you know, what happened to cool, badass, gnarly bikers? All I saw driving across country was like fat lawyers on their like brand new Harley with him and his wife in the brand new leathers. Like, where are the deadly, no helmet bikers of yesteryear? Yeah. Mom and pop restaurants. All these things that, you know, as secondary highways in this country become less and less frequented, and you know, travel by automobile becomes more and more difficult because gas is so expensive. I mean, it's cheaper to fly across country than it is to drive, which is crazy. I mean, when I went to school here, I drove back and forth every year because it was way cheaper than flying with all my shit. Nowadays, it's actually more expensive to pay for gas to drive across country, and as a result, less people travel domestically by car. And the downside of that is that the cool Americana on the side of the secondary highway is going. You know, like, I can't tell you the number in 2009 of rad mom and pop diners that I had stopped at years before that were now closed because no one drives down those roads anymore. And, you know, not necessarily the end of the world, but a little bit sad because I like hot dogs. This is just about drunk business dudes. This has to do with Texas and the state speed bump. Jump ahead a little. This has to do with, it's just about how quickly your life can slip out from under you. One of my neighbors had a really good job. He also had a crack problem, which I was unaware of, but he lost his really good tech industry job and began to, you know, smoke a lot of crack. And it wasn't 6 months later, I actually saw this same guy who lived in my neighborhood and made a lot of money panhandling downtown. And I was like, whoa, things are tough. Like, this dude had a sick job and a crack problem. I'll blame the crack as opposed to the economy, but just it was a inspiration for this painting as to how quickly your life will slip out from under you. There was a lot going on with our military at that time, and as well as I don't do very many political works, I had a neighbor who lost her son overseas, and this piece was just about sort of the real casualties of the war at that time, where like people's family members. And fast forward to last summer. My stuff, as you might have figured out by now, has a lot to do with storytelling. My dad was a public relations guy, and his dad was a salesman, and they're both like pretty funny storytellers. And I grew up really admiring that quality in them. And I am not as good of a storyteller as they are, but I try to use my artwork as a vehicle for telling stories. And the stories don't always have a great lesson, but they're based on real life. Most of them are things that happened to me, or happened to my friend, or the old weird fat guy at the bar told it to me, or, you know, I surmised it by looking at this crazy bum in my neighborhood, or any one of a million ways that sort of stories pop up in your head. Maybe it was a film, maybe it was a book, whatever. It's things that I could relate to. And I take those stories and pull them into little symbols and make art. And this opportunity I had in New York City, I decided I was sick of all my stories and they weren't funny anymore, and my life had gotten boring enough that I couldn't figure out what else to make stories about. And I decided I had a shitload of interesting friends whose lives were cooler than mine, and why didn't I make them each tell me their best story? Because everybody's got one, right? Like, everybody has one story that's just awesome. And so I thought, okay, I'll get 30 of my most interesting friends to tell me their favorite story. I'll take the bits from their story and I'll turn it into a painting. And then when you go to the exhibition, the gallery provided MP3 players next to each piece. So you could actually put the headphones on and listen to the person tell their story and look at how I decided to make it visual. If this is interesting to anybody, you can actually go on the Joshua Liner gallery website and you can still click on the paintings and listen to the stories. And I'll just go through a couple of these quickly and like tell you the funnier stories, in my opinion. Well, they're not always funny, but... This is by a really great little rap dude from New York named Despot. And it's about being a kid in New York City and skipping school and smoking weed and carrying a giant boombox around New York. And at some point, him and his friends tried to steal a giant tray of egg salad from a deli. And the owner confronted them, and they threw the egg salad on the guy. And basically, the cops wind up showing up at his house and stealing his boombox. This one is by one of my favorite artists in San Francisco, Mike Giant, who is an old friend of mine and a radical dude here in the city. He lived in London for a while and was really trying to paint trains, which apparently is super hard to do in London. You got to know somebody to take you through it. And he finally finds these kids, and they take him out into the suburbs, and they crawl into this train yard. And he does a piece on the train right as they get chased off, and he didn't get a picture. And for him, that was, it was a huge part of the recipe. He'd gone out to London, he'd waited all this time to get this opportunity to paint the train, painted the damn train, but had no way to prove it. And the English kids that he was with were like, all right, we gotta go, they know we're here, let's just fucking go. And Mike was like, no, sorry. He's like, I don't give a shit if they catch me and they deport me, I'm sick of this, I waited months to get this stupid train and I'm not leaving without it. So he doubled back around the yard and tried to climb up on somebody's little one-story garage to jump over the fence and get back into the yard from the other side, thinking the guards wouldn't know he was coming and he could take his picture and run. Well, he climbs up on top of this roof, and he's a fucking huge guy. I don't know if any of you have ever seen him, but Mike's 6-something, gigantic. It's a vanilla gorilla. And he gets on this roof, and the roof breaks, and he falls in, and he falls through a roof onto the roof of a car. And so now he's cut and stuck with nails and totally fucked up. And he's he wouldn't give up. He climbed out of the roof, climbed back through the hole that he fell in, climbed over the roof, climbed into the lot, went and took the picture, climbed back out, got in the car, and these kids were just holy shit. They're he's covered in all this dirt and soot from the roof, and he's got cuts all over him, he's bleeding out of his head. He's my hero. This was done by Grimy, who does all my tattoos and is one of the more radical tattoo artists here in San Francisco, and this is about a guy that he really looked up to, and one of his mentors in tattooing. That's a really great story. If you get, like I said, these are all super good, and I'm cutting them down to nothing. If you get a minute and they're interesting to you, just go on joshuaweiner.com and you can listen to the full story. This is by a folk singer named Kimya Dawson, and Kimya is a weird lady, and she didn't fit in her high school and wound up at one of those high school parties where you're the least cool person there and you feel really awkward. And it was the middle of winter. She grew up in Washington, and she was standing out by a pool with a bunch of other kids awkwardly drinking beer, feeling uncomfortable, and for whatever reason a frog hopped through the snow and into the swimming pool. And even though it was the dead of winter, she felt like the frog was going to drown, and so for some reason her gut was to jump in and save it. So in the dead of winter, she was freezing cold, but saved a frog, and no one thought she was a hero. This story was by Scott Warren, the guy that I was business partners with. He was on a skateboard trip to Serbia, and he's not shy about having a good time, and so he's over there, and someone's like, hey, we're going to go out to this jazz boat in a swamp. You want to go? And it's the middle of the night, and he's like, hell yeah. So he goes on this boat, and he said it's really something out of a fucking horror movie. He's like, there's no women at all, and it's just all these grizzled dudes with scars on their faces and prison tattoos. And everyone's drinking this clear liquor with no label on it. And he's just like, whoa, awesome, drinking and drinking. At some point he goes to take a leak, and it's a gypsy jazz kind of a scene. They said it's Django Reinhardt style music, which really sets the mood. And he's on a riverboat, it sounds to me like a great night out. But he goes to take a leak, and as he comes out of the bathroom, all these giant scary dudes surround him. And they're basically motioning to him. Scott's got a lot of tattoos. His arms are solid black, and he's got friendship written on his neck and all these other funny, goofy tattoos. And these guys were basically giving him the universal hand signal for show us your tattoos. And he was like, ah, okay. So he opens his chest, and on his chest he has a blueprint of his mother's sailboat. His mom sails all over the world by herself, and she's a really amazing lady, and so to remember her, he keeps her boat on his chest. At this point, they all get really quiet, and they're looking at the boat on his chest, and the biggest of the thuggy dudes, what he thinks is their leader, comes forward and is like, wow. And he whips out his chest, and he's got the riverboat that they're on in the exact same place as Scott's. And so the guy's just like, oh my god, we're brothers from different mothers. And it gets really creepy. So the guy then goes and gets the only woman on the boat and brings her in and kind of presents him to Scott. And Scott's just like, sweet, like, I got somebody to dance with, you know, like the only woman in the building. And at some point, she gives the universal symbol. She was like, oh, you know, we're giving you a present. This guy was just like, oh, hey, whoa, like, what? No, like. So he actually had to talk his way out of it. But the funniest part of his story is his explanation of how he got out of there, and just like the fact that he literally thought like they liked him for a second, and then suddenly like this guy's offering him this. This was my favorite story out of the whole show. And if you're only going to go online and listen to one of them, Snoop Dogg is not my favorite rapper of all time, or even close, but he is one of the most interesting motherfuckers I've ever talked to in my life. And I did a t-shirt for him when he played the Fillmore a few years ago, so he owed me a favor. And when I was doing this show, I contacted his manager, and you know, the fucking dude's impossible. Like, how do you get a dude like that to sit down for 5 minutes? So they make us show up at this Pepsi commercial in LA that they're filming. He was doing like promos for a Super Bowl snack thing. It was awful. And they made us sit in the corner of this film studio for hours. You know, like we're just sitting there like, this sucks. This is not going to be worth it. Like, what the hell? So finally, they're like, all right, you've got a few minutes. You know, like he's right there, but he has no idea why you're here. So you have to tell him really quickly what you want, and then see if he wants to do it. Fucking awesome, thanks, dude. So I go up to him and I was like, hi, Mr. Snoop Dogg, remember me, the guy that made your t-shirt? I have this art show, you tell me a story, I make a painting. What do you think? And he's like, let me go smoke some weed. They make us sit there some more while he's in the back smoking weed, and then they're like, okay, we're ready for you. And this is a true fucking story. So they lead us through this television studio into the green room, which is this like lounge area in the back. We walk in there, and I'm not even kidding. Dude is sitting at a table playing slow jams on his laptop, and there are 7 pastel-colored pimps, like full pimp suits, like the bowler hat, little tiny blunt, like matching pastel suit. And these guys are all dancing with like chicks in short dresses with big butts. And I was like, where have these people been all day? Like, you just have a party in the back room that when you're done shooting your Super Bowl promo, you go and dance with these dudes? Like, wow. And to his credit, told me the best story of anybody. So he goes, man, you know, he's stoned by this point. He's like, man, you gotta help me. Like, I got a million stories, like, I don't even know where to begin. You make a suggestion. I was like, well, you know, you've been kind of famous since you were a teenager. How about telling me about when you were a little kid? And he's like, all right, well, oh, I got one. So he tells me the story about going to this really good school. He came from a shitty neighborhood in Long Beach and got bused to a better school because he got good grades and was good at sports. So he got to take a bus to this, like, better school, elementary school. And he's in the lunch line one day, and there's this girl that he's got a crush on. And, you know, he tries, like, saying some cool stuff to her, and she's not really feeling what he had to say, so he pulled his dick out. To him, at 8 years old, that seemed like the best way to pick up a chick. And, you know, one of the professors in the cafeteria was like, hey, you can't do this, you know, like, you're coming with me. So they take him down to the principal's office, and they sit him down in front of the principal, and the principal's like, Mr. Broderick, you're getting thrown out of school, you can't pull your penis out in the lunch line. He's like, no, she's lying, I didn't. And he's like, what do you mean? She said she saw you, everyone saw you. He's like, no, she wasn't looking, it was my finger, I like put it out through my fly. And the punchline, like, he is such a good storyteller that off the top of his head, he told this whole story in about as long as I just did. And he ends it with like a punchline. He's like, yeah, the teacher said, well, then you got a really big finger. And he's got this like audience of pimps that are all laughing. You know, like, there's a reason that guy is as famous as he. This one, same thing. I made it around the same time as jet luggage, and I was just traveling a ton. But this one was not just about travel. This had a lot to do with a drawing that I had done as a kid that my mom had sent me around this time. And my mom had stumbled onto this folder of all this shit I had from grade school. And it was one of those reminders where you're like, oh wow, I just don't draw this stuff for no reason. Like, I must have always kind of thought this way. This painting is actually a modern version of this drawing that my mom sent. Yeah, I did when I was in grade school. So if there's any wonder why this stuff looks weird and I have like vehicles of dogs driving frogs and cats riding shotgun, apparently this is something I actually really think about or did when I was little.